I'm Dr. Timothy Vollmer. I'm Chairman of the Division of Neurology and Director of the MS Research Program at Barrow Neurologic Institute. What I'd like to talk to you a bit about is new therapies that are being developed for multiple sclerosis and programs that are ongoing at the Barrow Neurologic Institute to develop these therapies. Before I start that, though, I would like to mention a few of the basics about multiple sclerosis. First of all, this is the most common disabling neurologic disease to affect young women in the United States. It affects approximately 1 out of every 600 women and approximately 1 out of every 1,000 citizens of the United States. It has its onset in early life. This is a disease of young adults, with most people developing between 18 and age 45. It is a disease where inflammation is occurring in the brain that results in injury that leads to multiple symptoms. Some of those symptoms are permanent, leading to disability, and that disability tends to disable people from employment and many other activities. As a result of that disability, this becomes a very expensive disease, in addition to being quite devastating to many families and patients. This disease can cause multiple symptoms. Basically, anything the brain does can be affected by this. That includes such things as sensory problems, motor problems, pain, cognitive problems in terms of memory, recall, control of bodily functions, including problems with the bladder control, and muscle cramps and muscle stiffness, as well as tremors and other movement disorders. So it's a very complex disease, and the pattern varies tremendously from patient to patient in terms of how it affects them. But the bottom line is that all of these symptoms occur from the same problem, which is inflammation occurring in the brain. Now, we know a fair bit about this process. In this slide, which represents a section of the brain from a patient who had MS, it shows us that there are areas of injury here where there's active inflammation going on. And we know a fair bit about the processes that underlie that inflammatory attack on the brain, and as a result, we're developing new strategies to treat that. For example, we can cartoon the process as demonstrated here such that we can identify multiple pivot points for the process. In other words, these are points where if you attack them, you might be able to change the course of the inflammatory attack, possibly preventing it, which would then prevent the symptoms and the progression of disability. In this cartoon, there are multiple targets of the immunotherapy, including immune cells that are in the blood, immune cells that have migrated from the blood into the brain, certain brain cells that are interacting with these immune cells, and then various molecules and processes that this immune attack sets off that actually leads to the damage of the nerve fibers, and particularly the myelin that insulates these nerve fibers in the brain. And the point is that almost any one of these steps would be a valid target of therapeutic intervention. And in fact, we have developed strategies to intervene in many of these. The fundamental question, though, is which of these are really effective and safe enough to be used in humans with multiple sclerosis? And that's where we're at in our current research program. This is I have 2 slides here to show you that list a number of agents that are currently being used in clinical studies around the world in multiple sclerosis. And I've classified them into certain groups just to give you a general sense for the nature of these. The first group are the general immunosuppressants. And these are drugs that are relatively nonspecific in their mechanism of action. They basically work just by suppressing the entire immune system. Now, that's useful in MS. We have lots of data showing that those kinds of therapies can slow the progression of multiple sclerosis. But obviously, because they're nonspecific, they affect other functions of the immune system, which are very important for health. Your ability to resist infection and resist cancer in particular can be inhibited by these particular therapies. So they're useful in certain patients, but they're certainly not the ultimate goal. Now, some of these are not chemotherapies. IVIG, for example, are antibodies purified from human blood that seem to inhibit autoimmune disease without suppressing the immune system. But they still have a nonspecific effect and don't actually fix the problem or reprogram the immune system so that it stops making the problem. The second class of therapies are called cytokine-based therapies. And these are therapies that are targeting signaling molecules that are produced by the immune system that allow the immune cells to talk to each other and to influence each other's behavior. And so this is the language of the immune system, and by attacking these or injecting these kinds of molecules, we can change the conversation, hopefully promoting a direction of immune response that actually prevents the attack on the brain. The next group are what are called complex immunomodulators. These are therapies that seem to affect the fundamental regulation of the immune system in a way that is beneficial in multiple sclerosis. The main member of that class are the statins. These are drugs that many of you are already on. These are used to lower cholesterol. It's not to suggest that cholesterol is a problem in MS, but rather that the molecules that are used to generate cholesterol are also used for other purposes, part of which is to regulate the immune system. And it just happens that these medications shift immune behavior in such a way that it appears to be beneficial in MS. And there are several large studies going on to verify this. The next class are what are called co-stimulatory molecules. These are therapies that are actually directly attacking the communication between two cells. Immune cells, to talk to each other, both produce cytokines, as I mentioned before, but they also physically stick together and communicate through molecules on their surface. By decoding those molecules, we can actually learn their language and change the message, just like we can with cytokines. The next category are the adhesion-based therapies. These are therapies that are aimed at blocking the ability of immune cells that are floating in the bloodstream to stick to the blood vessel wall and migrate into the brain. Natalizumab, or Tysabri, is a recently approved drug by the FDA that targets that particular process and simply blocks the ability of immune cells to get into the brain. It has shown remarkable effectiveness in patients with multiple sclerosis. Another category, and the last two categories, are actually therapies that are specific, what we call immunoregulatory therapies. In other words, they're vaccine approaches. The approach of these is to immunize you with a new molecule and change the way your immune system works, in this case, shutting off the immune attack on the brain. Those are really what I would call the holy grail of MS therapy. That would be the most selective and most specific therapy. The challenge that we have is that it may not be adequate to simply introduce the target protein. You may have to control all of that immune communication that's going on around that protein using the other therapies that I've just mentioned. So one possibility is that the ultimate cure of MS will result by using one of these antigen-based therapies or these specific brain proteins in the context of therapies that control the way the immune system recognizes and communicates that recognition within its own structure. Now, go back. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about what the research process is. We have over 26 clinical research programs going on at Barrow Neurologic Institute in multiple sclerosis alone. These are studies that include basic biological studies to look at genes or proteins that are involved in the regulation or the response to multiple sclerosis or even the repair processes that occur in the brain. And those are meant to give us fundamental information we need to design the next generation of therapies. But in fact, the bulk of our studies, 20 out of those 26 studies, are actually clinical trials of new therapeutic agents. And they include agents for all types of MS, including relapsed-remitting MS, newly diagnosed patients, and patients that have had the disease for a substantial length of time and have fairly high levels of disability. It also includes patients that have a form of MS called primary progressive MS, for which there is no approved therapy at this time. The purpose of these studies is one of two goals. One goal is to either use the current therapies in a new way or in combination to get a better treatment effect. But the bulk of our studies are actually using new agents, which are on these lists that I've just shown you, that are being used in patients with MS to see whether they in themselves have beneficial effect, and then ultimately we'll begin to combine them with some of the prior agents. Having said that, the fundamental goal of all human research is to maximize safety and to provide true informed consent for patients. So participating in a clinical research project is much like getting a job. You're joining a team, happens to be my research team, to accomplish a mission. You'll have a certain task to do, which is to take the medication and report back on your experiences with that, to undergo safety examinations and neurologic examinations, etc. In return, what we do is we also monitor your safety in detail and also do various measures of neurologic function and immunological function to understand what the drug is doing and whether it's doing what we anticipated it doing. So it is a collaboration in developing new therapies. And in fact, no new therapy will be developed without this collaboration occurring. So it's a very important process. However, whether it's appropriate for you as an individual to participate in a study is a very personal issue, and it's dependent upon the kind of MS, your relationship with your treating physicians and the experimental group, and the goal of the study. And so what I would suggest is that if you have any interest in potentially participating in any one of the studies, either therapy trials or biological studies, is simply contact a research center near you. If it happens to be in Phoenix, Barrow Neurologic Institute and the Mayo Clinic Scottsdale programs have vigorous clinical research programs in MS, and both would be happy to talk with you about what they're doing. If there's any studies that you find interesting, they'll be happy to send you detailed information about what the study is about, the risks and benefits, and any other issues that you would like to find out about. So, in conclusion, multiple sclerosis is an area of medicine where there's very rapid advances being made. In fact, we have almost an embarrassment of riches. We have so many different therapies that develop now that conducting the clinical research is actually the limiting factor. It's the ability for us to communicate with patients and for patients who wish to get involved to actually find out about studies they would like to get involved with that limits the speed at which we can find these new therapies. That's why I'm talking to you about this today. So if you have any interest, please feel free to contact the National MS Society or the MS centers in your area and talk with the staff about the studies that are going on to see if any of them are right for you. Thank you.